Ethics for Court Interpreters, the Supreme Court of Ohio. Introductory Course for New Interpreters. Module 1. Ethics for Court Interpreters and the Model Code of Professional Responsibility for Interpreters in the Judiciary. From the time that we had the use of reason, we have been learning to distinguish between right and wrong through the education of our parents or caregivers and institutions. We have learned these important factors that affect our life. We are basically instilled with morality. Morality are the principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong and good and bad behavior. As we became part of organized groups of human beings, we learned about their standards of behavior. We learned about reward and punishment. We learned that there were consequences for our actions, whether they were good or bad. In essence, then, these organizations are informing us about their standards of behavior. They are basically telling us how we should behave while we are conducting some activity with or for them. The courts are no exception to this. Without realizing it, we are engaging in an ethical behavior. Ethics are moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. When you become a court interpreter, you basically adopt a code of ethics. What is a code of ethics? It is the core set of principles governing your behavior in a particular setting. In the same way that court interpreters have a code of ethics, lawyers too have one, judges have one, and other professional organizations have their own codes of ethics. Remember that the behavior for which they set a standard is grounded on values. Values are principles or standards of behavior of a person. It is one's judgment of what is important in life. It is what they find worth doing or living for. For example, accountability is a value. You are accountable for your actions, your words. What you do and what you do not do may affect others. The model code presented in this module that was prepared by the National Center for State Courts is the result of the effort to set standards for state court administrative systems for their utilization of court interpreters. Let us look now at that code of ethics. Canon 1. Accuracy and completeness. This basically means that you have to pay attention to the message that others are transmitting. You should pay attention to their tone and register. More on tone and register later. In essence, you need to place the limited English proficient participant on an equal footing with others who communicate in English. While you are interpreting, you cannot embellish, omit, or add anything said. Just because something sounded awkward, you should not fix it so that it sounds academic or polite. You do not own the words of the speaker. You are merely retransmitting those words or rendering them in another language so that the listeners can understand what has been said by the person who speaks the other language. The tone in which a word has been expressed carries meaning all unto itself. You should try to replicate the tone the speaker has used so as to convey the proper meaning. However, do not pretend to be the imitator of voice. If someone is shouting her words, keep a stern voice that reflects something other than a calm voice. This is no time for theatrics. Maintain the tone as a professional communicator of messages, and they will distinguish you as a true professional. You cannot augment or add anything said. You are not in a position to decide what is important and what is not. Often, people express their thoughts in a disorganized way. You should render those thoughts respecting everything that was said without deleting or omitting anything that the person just said. You cannot change the register of anything said either. Oftentimes, you will encounter limited English proficient people who have a low level of education. They will speak their language using words that are simple and not eloquent, and they may express themselves in their native language using dialects or syntax recognizable among uneducated people. In contrast, whatever the judge and attorney say may come out as very high level or high register language. You must render that language in the same way with the same high level words in the target language. You may think that the person for whom you are interpreting from English may not understand the complicated vocabulary that the judge and the attorneys are using. It is not your job to clarify language, to lower registers of language for anyone. If something is unclear for the listener, he or she should ask the person hired or appointed to represent their interests to explain anything that is not clear to them because of the registry used by the speakers. When people speak extemporaneously, they may hesitate, repeat, or correct themselves as they give information to the court. You should not omit anything that sounds repetitive. You should not omit fillers used in speech because they may show to the judge that they are unsure about the information that they are giving. This is critically important with witness testimony presented by the limited English proficient person. Another example of the duty to interpret everything said includes profanity. Judges want to know everything that is being said to them or to other people in their presence. Do you remember when we talked about the register earlier? If you hear profane language, do not clean it up or restate it in a less offensive way. You must be faithful to the source language message. It is important that you be familiar with colloquialisms, regionalisms, and proverbs. Not all of these have an exact translation. Therefore, you must be prepared to give a brief and concise definition or explanation that is the closest linguistic equivalent when you don't have a word that is exactly translatable. A word about proverbs. Factor in culture. For example, think of this proverb. A bird in hand is worth two in the bush. There may not be an exact translation for it in another language. In that case, find a linguistic equivalent that will be understood in the culture of the listener. If anything said is unclear to you, you must request a repetition or clarification. Remember to ask the judge for such repetition or clarification. Now, should you correct your own mistakes? Yes. You should constantly monitor your performance and determine if you have made a mistake by changing the meaning of the word or phrase, or omitting something, or even embellishing a statement or question. You have the duty to monitor your word product and to correct any mistakes you have made as soon as you detect them. Likewise, if someone states that you have made a mistake, treat it as an objective analysis of your performance. Do not take it as a personal affront to your performance. Consult, if you can, with a teammate or a dictionary to decide if you need to make a correction of your mistake on the record. Just to emphasize a previously stated point, be prepared with the vocabulary in both languages needed for the proceeding. No technical, idiomatic, regional, and street vocabulary. This will all help you make and render a productive, accurate, complete, and faithful rendition. Let's continue now to Canon 2. Canon 2, Representation of Qualifications. Interpreters shall accurately and completely represent their certifications, training, and pertinent experience. Be sure to get the training that will qualify you to interpret in the assignment. For example, if the topic is about child support, research the legal terms in both languages. Learn about the similarities and differences between the words. If they are cognates, beware of the false cognates because the meaning may be very different. Have your skills and knowledge tested. When asked, you should be able to show proof of your skills and knowledge. Find out if there are exams to test your interpreting skills and contact those who administer such exams to register to take them. Also, you may want to get tested on your oral proficiency in your interpreting languages, including English, if that exam will help you join a register of interpreter vendors. Document your career record with a portfolio and bring it with you. Start and maintain a portfolio of your work. Keep track of your training, diplomas, certificates, a current resume, the type of work you have done. For example, How many workers' compensation hearings, misdemeanor arraignments, drug trials, depositions, and other types of hearings or events have you interpreted in? If possible, document how many hours of effective interpretation you have done. Now let's go to Canon 3. Canon 3 is impartiality and avoidance of conflict of interest. Interpreters shall be impartial and unbiased and shall refrain from conduct that may give an appearance of bias. Interpreters shall disclose any real or perceived conflict of interest. What does it mean to be impartial? What is impartiality? Pause this audiovisual presentation for a moment and look up the meaning of the word impartiality in the dictionary. What does it say? According to the New Oxford Dictionary, impartiality means equal treatment of all rivals or disputants, fairness. The same way that the judge is viewed as an impartial arbiter in a dispute, you, as an officer of the court, must behave accordingly, because you are an extension of what the judge represents to the people that come to resolve their disputes in court. You are an instrument of the judge to communicate with all parties. Thus, you must display impartiality, not take sides with anybody, but concern yourself with interpreting accurately, completely, and faithfully everything said in the proceeding. What is bias? Pause this presentation and look that word up in the dictionary. The New Oxford American Dictionary defines this word as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. Therefore, in your behavior, you cannot have or feel any bias against any person present in the proceeding, such as an attorney that you may see as ill-prepared, or a judge that is unfair to immigrants, or law enforcement officers that may not treat deaf detainees well after arresting them. When it comes to conflict of interest, you must avoid it. Conflict of interest, per the same dictionary, is a situation in which a person is in a position to derive personal benefit from actions or decisions made in their official capacity. How does one determine that there is a conflict of interest? If you sense a conflict of interest with regard to an individual or group of persons, don't forget to disclose it to the judicial officer or interpreter coordinator. Here are some examples. Relationship with a party. Are you friends with each other? Are you related? Do you have an interest in how that person will fare at the end of the trial? Do you yourself have a stake in the outcome of the trial or decision of the judge? Did you have anything to do with the choice of the attorney of that participant or litigant? Have you provided services to this individual or individuals out of court in another area or assignment, and did they pay you directly for your services to them? On this last question, it may not be possible to discern whether you can be perceived as having a conflict of interest or not. You could have worked professionally, interpreting impartially and without any interest in the outcome of that other assignment. The other side, however, that is the opposing side, may view your involvement with the opposing party as if you were for the other side. Have you accepted gratuities or gifts for your services? Do you have or have you had any family, commercial, business, residential, or other relationship with the party or parties? Another example of a conflict of interest that occurs when you step out of your role and you perform other tasks that may be viewed as beneficial or prejudicial to court participants in a case, you have to be careful of the type of contact that you have with witnesses, attorneys, and defendants and their families, and even jurors. As a court interpreter, you must maintain a professional distance from court participants. You must be aware of your behavior at all times, so that you do not give the impression to anyone that you are favoring any special relationship towards one party versus the other. If you start giving explanations to litigants about forms, court documents, or legal concepts, this would show that you are partial to someone by giving them such explanations. It is also a conflict of interest when you advocate for someone's rights, be it linguistically or culturally. In court, The only advocate for a person, like a client, is his or her attorney. You may give the appearance of having a bias in favor of a witness if you are having a conversation with him on the witness stand. Be careful with the way you smile to or greet others. If somebody wants to shake your hand at the end of the proceeding, it is perfectly normal to shake that person's hand with the right professional behavior. Avoid at all costs sitting together with a court participant in the courtroom or in the hallway. Do not share a smoke, have coffee, or a meal with the court participant. In court, there is drama and sad moments. Don't think that you have to give a consoling embrace to a crying mother whose children the judge just removed from their home. Finally, remember that you are not a cultural expert. So do not try to explain or justify a person's actions or lack of knowledge about how things work in America because you do not know the litigant or court participant enough to understand what made them do what they did that brought them to court. Let's now look at Canon number 4. Canon 4, Professional Demeanor. Interpreters shall conduct themselves in a manner consistent with the dignity of the court and be as unobtrusive as possible. Before an assignment, learn about the protocol and procedures of the judicial system for which you are working. From whom should you obtain necessary information? With whom do you check in? How long do you wait before your matter is called? Where can you walk in a courtroom? What is the expectation others have about you? If you are resting while you're in a trial, you may still need to support a teammate by researching terminology and listening to her in case she has made a mistake or omitted something. Do not read the newspaper, solve a puzzle, or check messages on your smartphone. You should avoid obstructing the view of any person involved in the proceedings. Based on the demands of your language and how your interpretation will be perceived by the court participant, learn where to sit or stand in relation to a witness, the jury, and the judge. Let's go to Canon 5. Canon 5, Confidentiality. Interpreters shall protect the confidentiality of all privileged and other confidential information. Picture this situation. You are interpreting a private comment from the defendant to his attorney during trial. While examining a photograph presented by the prosecution showing a dead person with cuts and blood all over his body, the defendant whispers to his attorney, "Hey, that's how that bastard looked after I was done with him." Because of privileged and confidentiality of information, you cannot reveal any details to anyone. Now, imagine this other example. During a private communication between attorney and client, you become aware of several unfamiliar words. Back at the office, you discuss their meaning with colleagues. In this case, you do not reveal details about the conversation or even give names or case information. Thus, you are conducting yourself in accordance with this code. Let's go to Canon 6. Canon 6, Restriction of Public Comment. Interpreters shall not publicly discuss, report, or offer an opinion concerning a matter in which they are or have been engaged, even when that information is not privileged or required by law to be confidential. While you are interpreting in a trial that has caught the attention of the media, do not lend yourself to be interviewed by the press. Don't give in to the temptation of commenting to a journalist on words used in a trial and their cultural implications. Refer any questions to your coordinator. Canon 7, Scope of Practice. Interpreters shall limit themselves to interpreting or translating, and shall not give legal advice, express personal opinions to individuals for whom they are interpreting, or engage in any other activities which may be construed to constitute a service other than interpreting or translating while serving as an interpreter. The prosecutor asked the witness, "What did he do next?" The witness replied, "He hit me on my hand," while showing her right forearm. In this example, the interpreter should focus only on the words uttered by the witness for the interpretation of the answer. The interpreter is not responsible for any movement made by the witness. That includes body language and gestures. Others are responsible for clarifying on the record any location of objects, body parts, or other gestures made by the witnesses. Your task is solely to interpret. Do you know how to give legal advice? You could answer yes if you were an attorney and you were licensed to practice law in the state where you live or work. However, we're talking about your role as an interpreter. Remember that giving legal advice in your capacity as an interpreter constitutes unauthorized practice of law. You, the attorney, or even the court could be held liable for your trying to give legal advice to someone when you are not authorized to do so. Eventually, you could be penalized or lose your interpreter certification or authorization to work in the courthouse. Scope of practice also means that in your role as an interpreter, you must not explain the contents of forms or documents or even services to others. It is someone else's job to do that. Say, for example, that an attorney has just given advice to her client in a landlord and tenant matter. Before you interpret that advice, you give a look at the attorney because you believe that she forgot to offer another option to her client, an option that you have heard other attorneys give to their client. You interject, stating the other option in English to the attorney and that she forgot to mention it. On top of that, you go ahead and interpret it for the client. Can you imagine the consequences of the interpreter's behavior? Again, it is not your role to advocate for or give legal advice to anyone if you are not authorized to do so while in your capacity as an interpreter. Let's go to the next canon. Canon 8. Assessing and reporting impediments to performance. Interpreters shall assess at all times their ability to deliver their services. When interpreters have any reservation about their ability to satisfy an assignment competently, they shall immediately convey that reservation to the appropriate judicial authority. Here are some samples of impediments to performance you should be aware of. Background noise or other environmental limitations. More than one person speaking at the same time. The judge, attorneys, and witnesses could also be speaking too rapidly for you to comprehend or to even keep up. Or you can have the same individuals being hard to hear. You could also have a rambling witness. Now, do you think the interpreter should interrupt the proceeding? Most certainly so. It's an impediment to your performance. Then there could be physical limitations, like not having a direct line of vision to sign for the court participant. Interpreting without a break. Fatigue. In the words of a colleague of mine, remember, it is not an Olympic event. You're not supposed to interpret forever. Do your homework before the assignment. Find out about the vocabulary that you need. If you have the adequate experience, learn who will need services so that you can determine the necessary equipment. An audiovisual exhibit will be presented and the attorney requests that you provide a simultaneous interpretation of it. In that case, you should ask the coordinator if there is a policy and procedures to follow to actually comply with such request. It may be harder than you think. And notify the judge if you cannot understand a witness or the defendant. You may have to remove yourself from the proceeding. Now let's go to Canon 9. Canon 9. Duty to report ethical violations. Interpreters shall report to the proper judicial authority any effort to impede their compliance with any law, any provision of this code, or any other official policy governing court interpreting and legal translating. Know what your duties are as the interpreter and learn how to explain them to others. You may be asked or expected to do some things that go counter to this code, the law, rules, regulations, or policies governing court interpreters. If someone persists in wanting you to do something contrary to your role and duties, report them to your supervisor, judge, or another official knowledgeable about court interpreter matters to resolve the situation. Let's go to the last canon, canon number 10, professional development. Interpreters shall continually improve their skills and knowledge and advance the profession through activities such as professional training and education and interaction with colleagues and specialists in related fields. Here are some things you can do to become a better professional. For example, you can maintain and continually improve your interpreting knowledge and skills. You can support and encourage your colleagues in their professional development. You can network with colleagues, learning about their practices. You can do that participating in regional and national interpreter meetings. You can compare your decision-making processes with others' decision-making processes in terms of skills, knowledge, and the code of ethics. This marks the end of the listening session for Module 1. Now, please turn to the exercises that are accessible with the link provided. You will also have a quiz to test your understanding of relevant terms and the Code of Professional Responsibility for interpreters in the judiciary.